You just purchased the turnkey rental? Cool story, bro. Uh, if you just purchased yourself a turnkey rental, I want to make sure that you are aware that you did not only purchase a turnkey rental, but you have also gotten yourself into a long term committed relationship with the tenant that's living at that property, the tenant that you didn't screen, the tenant that you don't know. You're now in a relationship with them. So I figured, as a landlord of over 25 years and real estate investor for over 10, it might be a good idea to have a quick chat with Chatto regarding the pros and the cons of purchasing a property that already has a tenant in place. There can be some good things and there can be some bad things. And I wanted to kind of make sure that you're aware of both as you go out there and try to find properties to purchase. So first, I'm going to go over some of the pros. Some of the pros of purchasing a property with tenants in place is that you are going to go and you're going to look at the property. And when you go and look at the property, now they may be putting on a show for you, but when you go and look at the property, you're going to be able to get an idea of how they live and how they take care of the property. And are they taking care of the property or are they destroying it? Does it look like there's a lot of excessive wear and tear? Or does it look like, hey, wow, this place is beautiful. These guys are really taking care of the property. So you're able to get a glimpse into how they live when you go and look through the property before they become your tenant, because you haven't purchased the house yet. So that's always a great pro of purchasing a house with tenants in place. The other thing is when you're going through that walkthrough, and you're meeting the tenants, and they're showing you the property, and they're usually showing you around. And obviously, you want to make sure you let the seller or the agent, whoever, know what you're doing. But it's also a good idea to ask them, like, "Hey, are there any repairs that you think need to get done to this property? Is there anything that you think the landlord would need to handle that needs to get fixed up? Is there anything going on at the property?" Because they might turn around and say, "Yeah, there's this leak in this closet here that's been coming through every time it rains, and I've been telling the landlord about it, and he hasn't fixed it." Okay, so you're going to be able to get the perspective of someone who lives at that property on a regular basis and ask them and find out what the potential issues with that property are. So that's another pro of buying a property with tenants already in place. Number three, depending on your area and your municipality, sometimes the certificate of occupancy will transfer with the tenant. So just because ownership changed, if occupancy and the people that live there does not change, that certificate of occupancy will just transfer over until there's a turnover of tenants. Other areas, it's different. So that just sometimes that could be an advantage, is you don't have to go and get an inspection from the city and deal with all the stuff you need to deal with in order to get a fresh certificate of occupancy because ownership changed. And then lastly, a fourth pro is that you get cash flow from day one. So for example, I know we like to use the rent amount of $1,500 a month. If the property is rented for $1,500 a month and you close on, let's say, the 10th, you're going to get, so the tenant paid rent on the 1st, so that the seller got $1,500 on the 1st, but he only owned it until the 10th. You owned it from the 11th to the 30th or 31st, right? So you're going to get 2/3 of that rent, which is $1,000, is going to be a credit to you on the purchase of the property. So you get cash flow literally from day one when you purchase a property with the tenants in place. So those are some of the pros. Now there's also some cons you need to be aware of and you need to watch out for. Number one could be hidden tenant issues or tenants that are very difficult. And obviously the seller is not going to broadcast to you that these tenants are problematic, that these tenants always pay late, that these tenants are always complaining about this or complaining about that, or they're not going to let you know the problems that they have with the tenants because they're trying to sell the property. They're probably not going to broadcast that, and that's where it's your job to ask a lot of questions and ask them again and compare the answers the first time to the answers the second time. Does everything add up? Does everything make sense? You need to kind of dig in a little bit with the seller and ask important questions. Hey, has the tenant ever been late? Oh, no, the tenant's never been late. And then you might ask them again, oh, they've only been late once or twice. Oh, well, why did that change, right? Because they're making up stories? I don't know. Very well could be that they've never paid rent late. It happens. I have tenants that do that. But it does, it's something to be aware of, that they may be hiding an issue that they have with that tenant, that's going to transfer over to you, that's going to become your issue, and you become the new landlord. Another potential con of dealing with a property that has tenants in place is you may be buying that property from a quote unquote mom and pop landlord, somebody who does not treat it as a business. So you may not get accurate records of their payments. They might not be running as a business. They may let the tenant pay every month on the 15th. Well, you're not necessarily going to do that. They've been living there and they've been paying on the 15th for the past 5 years. And now you buy the property and you say, oh, it's due on the 1st and you don't pay by the 5th, you get your late fee. And they're like, no, I'm supposed to pay on the 15th. And it becomes a whole big thing. So you're buying a property, if you're buying it from a mom and pop landlord, you can have potentially some of those issues. And I've seen some pretty crazy leases with a lot of interesting clauses in them that either may not be legal and or may be detrimental to me as a landlord for them being in there. So just keep that in mind when you're purchasing from mom and pop landlords. Those kind of things may come up as you take over and start running it like a business. It could be a little bit of a shock to the tenant. Another thing is, there could be a legitimate reason that they're selling that house, right? They just may be tired of being a landlord. Tenants may be great, and they just need to, cash out. They need to get some money, and they just want to be done with it. They're moving, whatever the case may be. But I always need to ask myself in the back of my head, is there a reason that they are selling this property, and how much of that, how much of that reason that they are selling the property has to do with the behavior and or troubles they may be having with tenants. So just keep that in mind in the back of your head, because especially if they are having a lot of trouble with the tenant, they're probably going to try and hide that. And again, it's up to you to kind of fish that out, but keep that in the back of your mind that it may be a huge part of why they're selling. And that doesn't necessarily mean you don't want to buy the property. Again, it's something you want to be aware of. And another potential con is a lot of times a new landlord or a new owner coming in scares tenants for some reason. They get extremely worried about what's going to happen, and a lot of times they go, right? So you can end up, you can go from a pro of having cash flow from day one to having a turnover almost immediately, right? You can purchase that property and everything looks good, and you get that cash flow on the HUD from the 21st to the 31st. Cool. Now the first of the next month hits and you don't get your rent. And now you're filing for eviction and you're going through, you have that first mortgage payments due. You just purchased the property, right? And you have this tenant now all of a sudden that's not paying. Now you got to get them, you got to evict them. You have to turn the property over. You need to fix everything up and you need to get a certificate of occupancy. So you can really end up with a turnover from day one if you have a bad tenant. And you just need to keep that in mind when you are pricing out what you're willing to pay for this property. The tenants in the property actually do play into the value of the property. A lot of times as a buyer, when I'm purchasing a property, a lot of times I'd prefer it to be vacant. If it's not vacant and I'm buying a tenant that may or may not be good, I need to factor that in, right? Because if I have this turnover on day one, that might cost me 10 grand, right? So that's probably 10 grand I might be wanting to take off the purchase price when I'm making an offer. So that's just something to think about. Also, like some bonus tips and things to keep in mind when you're purchasing a property with tenants in place is always, when available, do your best to get a ledger that shows when the tenants pay every single month, how they paid, when there was late fees, are they paying, are the water bills, are those things getting paid on time? A ledger is a great way to kind of get an idea of the history and the track record of this tenant. And then sometimes depending on where you are located and what it's like to look it up, you may be able to go on public record and look up either the landlord, or if you know the tenant's name, and find out whether or not there's been any evictions filed. There's something hidden there that seller didn't tell you about that tenant, that, hey, I've had them in eviction court 3 times over the past year, right? That might be something you find. So if there's a way for you to look up that eviction history where you are, that might be something you want to do. Another tip is, and it's always good if you can do it, is if you can get what's called an estoppel letter, which is basically a short letter that the tenant signs. It says, hey, to protect everybody, we're just showing here that this is your lease. You have a security deposit of, I don't know, $2,250, and the rent you pay is $1,500 a month, and your lease is good through this date, and you pay every month on the 1st. Just like the basic terms of the tenancy, and you just get them to sign off on that. It may be helpful. And then that's also going to show, like, hey, that this lease that the seller gave you isn't fictitious, right? That they gave you the actual lease that tenant signed. It'd be great to show that to them, because obviously, if they don't have a lease, there's there's a lot of things that can happen with you not having a lease. So that's another thing, is to get an estoppel letter when possible. Get copies of all the leases. Confirm with the tenants that is the right lease is always helpful. Read the lease. Like, what's in that lease? What are the rules of that lease? Are they things that are going to screw you up? Because now, like, you're not using your lease. You're used, as a landlord, I know my lease. I know what's in it. I know what's expected. I know what's not expected. When I get that lease from the seller, like, there may be things in there that I don't normally do, right? It may cover the washer and dryer, right? And we don't normally provide that. So now it's like, okay, now I have a washer and dryer that I need to keep running for these tenants, and just that kind of thing. Who's responsible for water? I purchased the house, and the tenants had the landlord paying for the water. Like, what do you mean we're paying for the water? You're the one using it. You pay for the water. So we had to renegotiate with that tenant on that after closing. Another thing that you want to watch for that's a potential red flag is, are they telling the tenants that they are selling? Sometimes the seller does not want to let the tenants know we're selling. Don't tell them we're selling. Don't tell them we're selling. I've had them, when you go to the house, pretend you're an insurance adjuster. No, I'm not going to pretend I'm an insurance adjuster. Get out of here. But I can understand that they don't want to, like, announce to the tenants that they're selling the property. That happens a lot. So, like, okay, cool. Well, in that case, what I normally do is, hey, okay, awesome. Just tell them that I am going to be a potential property manager. Because while I'm looking at buying the property, I'm also going to manage it, and I am a potential property manager. And it's just a better way to go about it. And then that also helps me position it when I go to the property and see it. Say, hey, we're going to be potentially taking over management of this property. What kind of stuff needs to get done? Again, back to the previous question of asking the tenants what needs to get done. And it gives you an opportunity to potentially have a conversation with the tenants, and get them talking, because that'll help. That a lot of times opens up your eyes to a lot of things that you may not already know. And I guess another bonus would be, do you know the local laws well enough when you purchase this property with tenants in place? And if things go sideways, do you know what it's going to take to get them out? Because there are certain areas of this country, from what I understand, that could be a year-long process. And if you purchase a property with no cash flow from day one, and it takes you a year to get them out, and then you have to turn it over, you could put yourself in a really bad spot. So you want to know what that legal process looks like before you purchase that property with a tenant in place. If things go sideways, you want to know what that whole process looks like. So that's just a couple of things to think about, some of the pros, cons, and things to keep in the back of your mind when purchasing a property with tenants in place. And I've purchased properties where the tenant was evicted on day one, and I've purchased properties where the same tenants have been there for the last 5-6 years since I got the house. It could go either way, but it's just something that you need to keep in mind when dealing with these properties and you're purchasing them with tenants in place. So without further ado, hopefully you've been here almost 15 minutes. If you like, this content, if you've been here this long, obviously I'm somewhat entertaining. Like and subscribe, because like algorithm and all that good stuff. And also, like, let's have a conversation in the comments below. Is there any other pros or cons that I missed? Anything else to add to the conversation? And anything else that came up for you when you purchased a property with a tenant in place? So again, thanks for tuning in to this episode of Chat with Chatto, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.